So the Sherman Act, and it of course regulates or looks at, I'm sorry, it doesn't really regulate, that's when we get into the Clayton Act when we talk about that, but the trustees, it looks at the trustees and the beneficiaries. And the main thing, and you'll hear this term often as we go through this, is things that involve restraint of trade, when there's conspiracies, contracts, whatever, or even just individual monopolies that would restrain trade, do things to stop other companies or individuals from competing, is when they get in trouble and suffer the consequences then of the Sherman Act. Could be monopolies, right? And monopolies could be deliberate, but again, they have to involve predatory conduct. We do have monopolies times, and sometimes monopolies just form naturally. Facebook's, you could almost argue, has kind of a monopoly on social media, and Twitter kind of has its own monopoly in a sense, but they're not really predatory. They're not really restraining trade. They're not doing things to deliberately stop other companies from entering those spaces. Okay, and so they're allowed to exist as, in a sense, monopolies. Things we look at, the first one is the rule of reason, right? Test of reasonableness, and again, that's just kind of the things that they look at. If you looked at a Twitter, say, that obviously no other company really does that, okay, but are there other companies or other ways of communicating? Well, sure there are. Okay, you could blog, you can email, you can do lots of other things that aren't Twitter, and so even though Twitter has a monopoly sort of in that space, it's not something that needs to be addressed, under the Sherman Act anyhow. And those are the things that they look at in all cases. Then a per se illegality is proof of activity or proof of violation. It's something that's so obviously wrong as to be considered illegal. For example, price fixing would fit under that. So two companies get together and fix prices to the detriment either of the competition. They might fix prices too low, for example, to the detriment of competition, or fix prices too high to the detriment of the consumer. And in either case, it would be considered a per se illegality, and those are distinguished on a case-by-case basis. The middle ground of that is a quick look analysis where we'll take a look and see if it's something that deserves further consideration, I guess. But you have to have these three elements. Okay, there has to be a combination, a contract or a conspiracy. It has to be an unreasonable restraint of trade. Again, the key words, that restraint of trade. And it does have to involve interstate commerce for our federal government to be involved. So what are some of those per se standards that we talked about? And they are this, price fixing is one, which is, again, two competitors maybe getting together to fix price. Tying arrangements, where if you buy this product, you must buy that product, and that's this long before you guys, but Microsoft, that's what they went after them. Long drawn out case. The resolution was complicated and not necessarily of any meaningfulness, but basically the claim was there. Anytime you bought a PC, and back in those days, Microsoft had a fairly big monopoly on PC operating systems with their Windows operating system, or this was before Windows, but they had a big monopoly, and when you bought it, you also ended up with the Internet Explorer that was built right into the computer, was built right into the program, and that was kind of considered, or at least they went after him for tying arrangements. When I said that the conclusion was kind of confusing, it's really because by the time the case had concluded, the competitive environment had changed so much that really the conclusion of the case was almost irrelevant. There were so many other players in the market that were doing some of those same things that it just didn't matter. Group boycotts, companies going together to maybe boycott another company, could be dividing markets, and that could be either geographically or by market type or by product maybe. So you take east of the Mississippi, we'll take west of the Mississippi, so we don't butt heads. That can be considered a dividing of the markets. But you could, you sell this product and we'll sell that product. So it could conceivably, I suppose, be by type of product. So what are the sanctions? Could be, of course, fines and imprisonment. It's enjoined by the courts. Okay, the Sherman Act really falls under the purview of the Department of Justice as opposed to the Federal Trade Commission, and so that means that the courts join in. Right? It can be either, right? So criminal, it's going to be beyond a reasonable doubt, but it could be a civil case that they would bring against a company. And I suppose it would depend on, what if there was intent, that would probably bring in criminalness to it versus just, some of these monopoly things happen, or some of these violations might happen. It's not intent. It's just negligence, maybe, even in that case. Could be triple damages, and of course property can be subject to seizure or forfeiture. So the fines in millions, and we see this big run up here before you guys, but that was the big .com bubble, when we had lots and lots of companies, .com companies forming, merging, doing all kinds of different things, and so there was this huge run-up in activity, criminal activity, related to mergers and acquisitions. Incarcerations, and this is actual people, right? Just not that many people, that actually end up getting incarcerated for violation of some of these laws. And this goes back quite a ways. I'm not sure. I think I've looked for updated figures and can't find any, but the numbers are still relatively small. There are exemptions to the Sherman Act. Insurance companies can, and part of the reason is they may cover certain events where they may have a monopoly. They may cover certain geographic areas that other companies don't want to cover. We're starting to see that in health insurance, for example, where they may just have a monopoly, right, and be kind of exempt from these things. Farm cooperatives, and again, largely because they cover areas that are maybe just underserved or not served, and so the cooperatives can get together and provide those services, and they would have a monopoly. Shipping, and think about railroads, that ship, and they have monopolies on the northern tier. BNSF has a monopoly. Milk marketing, don't ask me why. I have no idea, but that probably goes back to the old days, to protect the dairy farmers or something. I don't know. Investment companies, and them too. I don't know why, they would be allowed monopolies in some areas. That'd be interesting. I probably should look that up and know myself, but I don't. Okay, now state action. So states can have monopolies and be in violation, basically, of Sherman Act, state governments and whatnot. Labor unions, they can certainly have monopolies in their areas. Major League Baseball. Wow, why would Major League Baseball have an exemption? Well, the story behind that is at one time, years and years and years ago, long before you guys were born, but there was an alternative league that decided to form and battle against the Major League Baseball, the Major League Baseball that we know. And so they did, and they failed. Well, after they failed, they sued the Major League Baseball and said that they had done some predatory practices that prevented them from being successful. And it looked like the lawsuit was going to be successful, and so Congress stepped in because, baseball, hot dogs, apple pie, right, and Chevrolet, I mean, that's all American Major League Baseball is, and we couldn't see them getting sued out of business, and so basically Congress gave them protection, some monopoly protection. And the Noor-Pennington immunity for lobbying, so lobbyists can have those types of exemptions as well. Again, types of cases, and we've talked about that. Price fixing, it can be horizontal between competitors, but also be vertical. And vertical is a resale price, meaning that manufacturers can't set a price. Okay, they can have a suggested retail price, or the Colgate doctrine says that they can set prices, but without coercion or pressure. Okay, so they can say this is what you will, but if somebody violates that or lowers the prices, they can't do anything about it. Okay, territorial agreements, horizontal ones are per se, meaning again, if you have competitors that are similar competitors that are dividing up territory, not good. Vertical are not per se, and what that means is think of like auto dealerships, or sometimes other franchises do this as well. Chevrolet only allows so many dealers in a certain area. Okay, to allow too many dealers might dilute the business just too much. Okay, and Chevrolet would understand that, or GM would understand that, and so they might allow that to happen. And concerted activities, again, companies getting together, and again, in restraint of trade, that would be of huge concern. International cases are huge, right? 90% of criminal fines imposed relate to international cartels, so they're coming in and exerting some monopoly power, perhaps, and our antitrust people go after them. So most large defendants are foreign-based, so it's interesting. Maybe it's because they don't know the laws, I don't know, or feel that they shouldn't have to comply with those. We'll do the Clayton Act when we get to Part 3.